During the so-called Little Ice Age that began in the late Middle Ages, the average temperature dropped to a level high enough to cause repeated crop failures. People are starving. Coldness is not merely inconvenience. This is very dangerous. When you imagine the frost outside, remember that it is not always pictures. This might mean famine. When you approach, you notice that the smoke seeping out of the chimney is very thin because there is very little wood. The fire that burns all night is a dream, but the firewood is carefully allocated. If you use it too much now, it will freeze stiff later in February. The embers in the fireplace lingered for a long time, but they weren't ever enough to dispel the chill in the large room. There is a strange little flower edge here. Some farmers apply cow blood or even mud mixed with straw to the outside of the walls in winter, which is a primitive insulation strategy. These layers harden like cement, slowing down the entry of wind. Imagine you are sitting in a room with a faint smell of blood roasting on the walls, thinking that this can protect you from frost. You walk into a small house with only one room. This is a shared life. Parents, and perhaps grandparents, and possibly a few chickens or goats. The smoke hung low, stinging your eyes. You'll notice that the frost stubbornly sticks to the rafters. The wall was shivering in the wind. In this place, sleeping is not a gentle luxury. This is the battle plan. Every family member plays their own role. Scholars are still debating whether past winters were always harsher than they are now, or if we have nearly romanticized the pain. Some people believe that people have adapted to different baselines and have become stronger through continuous exposure. Others, however, believe that the sudden change in climate made those nights feel like disasters. But no matter where the academic debate lies, the reality of the frost on the thatch and the frost in the night pot is something you can almost feel now. You curled up on the imagined strawwet, the air blowing against your cheeks, your nose half numb, and you panted in the darkness. Someone pulled a rough wool blanket over both of you beside you. It was a bit rough, but very important. The sounds outside gradually faded away, and the hissing of the wind and the occasional groans of the beams in the cold. At that moment, you realized that the frost on the roof was more than just a sight. The enemy is right above you, waiting for you to continue to fall until it seeps into your very bones. You lay there, listening to the shimmering brook protesting, and then realized something important. One person is never enough to withstand the cold. In the Middle Ages, survival was not a solitary sport. The whole family crowded onto a single bed covered with a sack of straw or a rough mattress. This is not the fairy miners-like canopy bed you might imagine from a tapestry. It is usually just a bag of bread sewn from coarse linen, and even in giving off a faint musty smell. However, when 6 or 7 people climb onto the mattress, it will become active due to the heat. The mainstream historical facts here are obvious. Beds in the Middle Ages were shared. In the UK, France, and most parts of Europe, it is completely normal for parents, children, and sometimes servants to share a bedroom. They even invite visitors to climb in. This kind of behavior is more necessary than intimate. You squeeze between 2 siblings on an imagined bed, feeling your elbows and knees clashing, and someone's cold foot brushing against yours. At first it was chaotic, but then heat began to accumulate. The human body is a furnace that constantly generates heat. The more people you squeeze together, the warmer you will become. You suddenly understand why a big bed is not for luxury but for survival. Here is a strange gossip. Records show that even the innkeeper often placed strangers on the same bed. Imagine that you walk into a roadside tavern tired and cold on the road, and are guided to squeeze into a farmer and his wife, perhaps along with a traveling vendor who smells of salted fish. For us, it's embarrassing. For them, it's practical. Historians remain puzzled about how much privacy people expect from this sleep arrangement. Some people believe that people in the Middle Ages were less sensitive to touch and exposure simply because their daily lives were too crowded. Others insist that embarrassment does exist, but it is overwhelmed by absolute necessity. You can be sure that trembling alone is far more dangerous than enduring a stranger's snore. The smell in such a bed is hard to ignore. The walls never really dried. The straw got wet, and the sweat from people mixed in the blanket. You breathe suffocated, but you also notice that your nose begins to melt. Would you be willing to exchange warmth for fresh air? Most people did it without hesitation. The children are so small and vulnerable that they are often placed among this group of people, wrapped up like tiny embers. Parents and elder siblings formed a living shield around them. You can imagine a father stretching out his arm to protect the youngest child, even though he himself is shivering on the verge of the cold seeping in. When you are drifting in this scene, the breathing sounds around you become hypnotic. The snoring, the sound of big and small, and the rustling of straw all formed a kind of medieval white noise. This is the voice of survival. A family has turned into a breathing beast in the frost. The storm outside made the blinds rattle, but in your heart, the wolf you shared drove you away from the night. You move on the rough straw bag, aware of every movement of your body pressing down on you. It's very warm but not comfortable either. This is the time when you notice the gap between the rich and the poor most clearly. For farmers, a bed is a pile of shared straw and cloth. However, for the nobility and wealthy townspeople, the feather bed was supreme. In winter, this difference might imply the boundary between a painful existence and a life close to comfort. A mainstreamed historical fact is beyond doubt. In medieval Europe, down mattresses and quilts were symbols of privilege. The harvest of goose down is extremely arduous. It is either plucked from live poultry or collected after being pupped and then sewn into layered gunny bags. When you lie on such a bed, it will expand beneath you, lift you out of the frozen floor and wrap you in a soft cotton. Bones, but also absorbs heat more effectively than straw. You climb into these elite beds in your imagination. The wooden frame is embedded beneath the magnificent pillars carved with symbols of the family's bloodline. The canopy above is not only for decoration but also can prevent heat loss. You lie on the feather bed and immediately feel the difference. The mattress is not a wet haystack but evenly holds you in a cradle, just like sleeping on a warm cloud. For a person in the Middle Ages, he might never have had true comfort. This feeling was like a miracle. Now it's a bizarre anecdote. Some noble families are very proud of their feather beds and even write them in their wills. When getting married, my mothers bequeathed my best down mattresses and quilts to their daughters, treating them as treasures. They are indeed treasures. Making a feather bed may take several years and cost more than a farm worker's annual salary. Imagine an airy box, not filled with gold, but stuffed with quilts, because in a cold world, warmth is wealth. When you recall the farmers' cottages, the contrast becomes quite obvious. The straw mats must be replaced frequently, usually with rush grass collected from the riverbank. In winter, the straw may be rotten, damp and full of insects. The smell of earth and soreness sticks to you. Imagine lying on it after a day's work, knowing you'll be itchy all night. Then imagine walking into a magic house where the guest's bed is covered with goose down and fur. The gap between classes is rarely as real as it is now, pressing on your skin when you sleep. Scholars are still debating just how common feather beds are. Some people believe that only the wealthiest elites, royalty and large landowners had feather mattresses, while others point out the surviving wills and inventories indicate that prosperous townspeople and merchants managed to afford at least one feather mattress in their families. One thing is very clear: their existence symbolizes status, just like silverware or embroidered clothing. Inviting guests to your down bed is not only a sign of hospitality, but also a manifestation of status. But don't mistake the knights of the nobility for perfect comfort. Their castle was a drafted stone cave, and the cold wind blew in through the arrow crevices disguised as windows. Down beds can be helpful, but not every room should be lit. It's bone-chilling cold. Even the king slept wearing layers of woolen, sometimes a lined hat. This difference is relative. It is more comfortable than straw, but can never compare with the heated houses we have today. Let yourself imagine the details of your senses. When you roll up, the size of the feather bed gives off a faint smell of goose down. Dust is flying, but it's very warm. The quilt above is embroidered with exquisite embroidery. It feels very heavy when held in hand and presses on your body, making you toss and turn. The candle in the candlestick emitted a golden warmth, flickering on the tapestry on the wall that blocked the wind. You hear the faint crackling sound of the sanding machine in the corner, and the room is filled with a soft glow. By medieval standards, this was luxurious. However, despite these advantages, you can still see your breath in the cold air. Meanwhile, in the servants' dormitory downstairs, strong actresses were lined up side by side, pressing against the wooden boards. The servants huddled together like farmers, dressed in patched woolen clothes and covered with only a thin blanket. The room was filled with the smell of smoke and sweat. It's more solid here because the chimney doesn't reach that deep. You realize that in the same family, two worlds coexist. One is wrapped in feathers, and the other is rough and rough. Think about the social significance of this. A feather bed is more than just bedding. This is a statement of survival, comfort and hierarchy. Guests who have experienced it themselves will know that they have been treated very well. Wills ensure that they can be passed down, because warmth can determine your future just like land on livestock. But the bedding made them noble. Another unusual phenomenon is that sometimes in cities, wealthy families rent down beds to travelers. Imagine checking into a medieval hotel and being told that you can pay extra to sleep on a real goose-down bed. It reminds us that warmth is a commodity, a commercial transaction, even centuries earlier than heated hotels. However, despite being so wealthy, some nobles still complained. Surviving letters and family manuals mention that feather beds are too soft and can cause pain. Others are worried that they are more likely to breed pests than straw because the dense filling is difficult to be expelled through the air. Yes, it's a kind of luxury, but it's not without drawbacks. Imagine a noble woman fanning herself dejectedly from an itchy bite, while a servant mutters that perhaps straw is more practical. In your mind, the feather bed has almost become a symbol. This is not merely a place for rest. This is a manifestation of inequality in the Middle Ages. You close your eyes and feel the difference between lying on the damp straw among family members and animals and lying alone in the down quilt under the embroidered curtains. The two experiences were separated by walls and wealth, but both were tormented by the same cold of winter that crept in from outside. So, when the frost on the window grows thicker and only embers remain in the fireplace, you realize something almost ironic. Whether you lie on straw or feathers, the cold of the Middle Ages will never truly spare you. The best minus-case scenario is that you buy a bit of softness, a bit of insulation, and the comfort of knowing that you are paying for warmth that others can't buy. That the breath rising before your eyes still reminds you that you are only a few layers away from the never-minus sleeping frost. The down bed lingers in your imagination, soft and tall. But the fact is that most medieval families never touched goose down in their entire lives. Instead, they turned to the most accessible and reliable heat source, where they could find living, breathing animals. You can imagine, at dusk, a small stream by the wooden gate, a farmer dragging his feet in, leading a reluctant goat behind him, the several hens hopping around behind him. In the corner of the room, curled up on the floor covered with rush grass, a dog wagging its tail half-heartedly has already become part of the night ritual. This is the mainstream historical fact. Animals are often kept indoors in winter, not only to prevent thieves or predators, but also because their body temperature creates measurable differences in the room. Otherwise, the room would hover above 0 degrees. In a simple farmhouse where there is no fireplace in any room, the warmth of a cow or a pig is more valuable than any tapestry. You slowly approached in your imagination, sat cross-legged by the stove, and watched your family settle down. A pig let out a loud sigh and curled up its body with astonishing tenderness. Its hard fur gives off warmth into the cold air. Chickens flapped and rested on the beams, leaving behind a faint smell of dust. A dirty dog curled up by the bedside, pressing on your leg and deliberately saying, "I belong here. I'm warmer than you." The heat generated from this accidental zoo kept accumulating until the frost inside the blinds began to melt slightly at the edges. Now it's a bizarre anecdote. Medieval literature occasionally made jokes about bed dogs, not referring to pets as companions, but the literal role of dogs on the bed to keep your feet from freezing. Wealthy families even keep small pugs for this purpose. Imagine them as furry live thermos flasks. Imagine tucking it under a blanket at night, its little body trembling for you, and you muttering thank you to the Daltons. Of course, scholars are still discussing how common this practice is. Do farmers generally sleep in their huts with livestock, or is it only seasonal during the coldest times? Some people believe that many animals live in fixed byres or stables, separated by a thin wall. Their heat is still seeping into the living space. Some people also say that goats and pigs often wander freely in the room, especially on warm nights when idleness prevails. The compact floor plan of the archaeological discovery supports both viewpoints, whether through the walls or under the same rafters. On medieval nights, animals were actually roommates. But companionship comes at a price. You wrinkle your nose when you smell the fragrance. Goats give off a pungent musk. Chickens shed their feathers. The pig kept humming. The straw beneath my feet was scattered with the feces that had been swept up in a hurry in the morning, that they had never been completely cleared away. You also imagine the landscape of sounds, the intermittent clucking of hens, the soft snoring of cows, the occasional tree bark cutting through the darkness. Sleeping here is neither quiet nor fragrant, but very warm. Despite this, people still attach great importance to warmth to the extent that discomfort becomes bearable. Taking a nap to the rhythm of animal sounds is always better than waking up stiff from the cold. In fact, the psychological comfort brought by hearing a dog's breathing or a cow's weight change might even be soothing. This is a kind of medieval white noise. You begin to understand why Obeah and stories sometimes mention animals as guardians of the fireplace. For a noble family, the situation is different. The animals do not share the master bedroom, but the precious pud can still find its way under the quilt. And the cat has gained a permanent spot near the fireplace because it can catch rodents. In the 15th century, a noble woman even suggested in a letter to her daughter leave the puppy on your bed to make you feel comfortable. This piece of advice is both practical and considerate. Imagine an tapestry in a room fluttering in the wind. The hostess stuffed a fluffy Spanish hound under her fur coat, and the servants warmed themselves by the stove. Even in the luxury goods industry, animal fever has its place. The sensory experience deepens as you delve deeper. The thatched cottage was dim, and the fireplace was shrouded in smoke, filled with the scents of wool, straw, feathers, feces, and a faint smell of wood ash. You put your foot clenched to the dog and feel its body trembling in its sleep. Your hand is placed on the rough fur, rough but reassuring. Outside, the wind was rustling the blinds, but inside, the shared breathing of humans and beasts prevented the cold from spreading too far. There is also a social aspect here. Sharing spaces with animals blurs the boundaries between humans and animals in daily life. Modern hygiene concepts simply do not exist. Families think less about filth and more about survival. Children are accustomed to sharing blankets with dogs during their growth or waking up to hear roosters crowing indoors. Imagine that the feeling you usually think of as chaotic and unhygienic is just winter for them. Occasionally, religious writers would complain about this intimate relationship. Some monks complained that farmers' lives were no better than those of pigs, and their farmhouses were full of wild beasts. However, those monks living in public dormitories might have overlooked the wisdom hidden in this arrangement. First comes warmth, and then dignity. The scene lingered on, with a family huddled together, a dog lying on their feet, a pig approaching the door, and a chicken on top. The frost outside had already gotten out of control. It's messy, noisy and pungent, but it works. This explains more than anything else how people in the Middle Ages survived the darkest nights without freezing to death. You were half asleep and half awake, curled up on the warm dog at your feet. When someone at home drags a heavy mulch over a pile of corpses, the fabric is rough, roughly touching your chin, but heavy enough to press you down even deeper. You moved it gently and brushed the surface with your hand, realizing that it wasn't wool at all. The fur is thick, musky, and undeniably warm. This is the mainstream historical fact. Before quilts and down quilts became common in Europe, many families relied on animal fur as their main bedding. Wolf skins, sheepskins, and even bear skins were spread over the sleeping people. Fur traps air in its dense layers, providing better insulation than woven fabric. For medieval families, especially those in the north, they were not merely a luxury. They are survival tools. Imagine the feeling of draping sheepskin over your shoulders. The linseed oil and the wool leave a faint residue on your fingers. The smell is rich and earthy. When you bury your face in, you will smell the lingering odor from the animal. It can both comfort people and remind them of hunting. The weight is heavy, touching the ground, as if the fur is nailing you to the bed, refusing to let the cold seep in. Now, a strange gossip. In some families, fur is not merely spread on the bed. They are hung on the wall, serving a dual purpose. Nailing wolf skin to the back of the head can both keep warm and block the wind. Seeing its roaring face, even showing teeth after death, it might be a medieval night lamp, a talisman to ward off evil songs. Children who fall asleep under its gaze may feel both at ease and faintly scared. Scholars are still debating how ordinary farmers can obtain such furs. Is exposed skin really a common sight in cottages or a precious possession of hunters and lords? Some people believe that poorer families mainly relied on abundant and practical sheepskins, while the nobility flaunted exotic furs imported from the north, such as mink or sable furs. A luxurious collection of these furs is listed on the list of the noble manor, which indicates that keeping warm is also a manifestation of prestige. Meanwhile, farmers have to make do with whatever their flocks offer. Nevertheless, even the unremarkable sheepfold played a role. Imagine a mother tucking her child under several pieces of wool that are pieced together. The wool was rough but comfortable. The small room was filled with the smell of flaxseed oil, which masked the soreness of the damp straw. Outside, the wind howled like a ghost, but the children were sweating slightly under their leather coats, their cheeks flushed from the bone-minus chilling night. For the rich, this practice has become a spectacle. In castles and magic houses, beds may be covered with various furs, such as fox fur, mink fur, and lynx fur. The choice of each fur is not only for keeping warm but also to show one's status. Especially for human beings, their white winter clothes remind people of purity and nobility. A noble woman lying beneath a man is not merely feeling warm. She's announcing her position to anyone who enters the room. You can almost hear the rustling sound of the servants carefully arranging the furs to ensure that each piece shows its magnificence. But even luxury goods have their limitations. The castle is notorious for its through wind. Imagine sleeping under 3 layers of fur in a huge stone hall. And when you wake up, your breath covers your face. The fur keeps your body warm, but your nose is still cold. If your hands leave the quilt, they will go numb. The sweltering heat beneath the blanket contrasts sharply with the cold air outside, which is one of the typical feelings of winter sleep in the Middle Ages. This is another bizarre twist. Fur is sometimes used as portable bedding. Travelers might carry parchment scrolls and unfold them on the floor or bench at night. In a world without a central heating system, your blanket is your bed, your survival kit, and sometimes even a symbol of your status. A passing merchant was showing off his smooth fox skin, which was not merely bragging about a deal. He was showing off a reliable way to avoid frostbite. There is a kind of tactile memory in this. You can feel the ruffle grasping your wrist, the soft fox brushing against your cheek, and the weight of the bear pressing you down on the straw. When someone moves, you will hear a lone rusting sound and the rubbing of fur against each other. You smell the lingering fragrance of musk, sometimes pleasant and sometimes sour. The sensory world of fur reminds us that sleep in the Middle Ages was not sterile and comfortable. It is primitive, simple, and comes from the heart. Of course, fur also has certain risks. Pests like to drill holes in thick oil layers. Lice and fleas make their homes in fur and thrive in warmth, just like humans. To ventilate them, every household would hang animal skins over the fire or attach them to the fence in the weak winter sunlight. Imagine women hitting leather with sticks to drive away insects, while children watch the dust rise like smoke. Pests are still very common. You traded an uncomfortable cold for another kind of itching. Even so, when frost is scraping back and forth on the blinds and ice is reverberating in your windows, this deal is still worth it. The weight of the fur is a comfort. No matter how bitter the night is, you are wrapped in the echoes of the survival of animals. That sense of continuity, that warmth given to life after death, might also have brought psychological comfort. You think about its symbolic meaning. In many cultures, wearing a sleeping in the animal skins is regarded as inheriting the power of animal skins. A child hidden beneath a wolf's skin might be regarded as braver because he is protected by the predator's spirit. A warrior sleeping under bear fur might believe that the power of animals still lingers in the skins. Whether this belief warms the body or not, it surely warms the heart. The fire in the fireplace crackled. You pull the fur on your body tighter. Its weight presses you down on the mattress. The straw stings your body, but the warmth is undeniable. Outside, frost crept quietly across the thatched roof, showing no concern for your survival. However, beneath your rough skin, you almost think you have stolen warmth from the wild. Tonight, at least the cold won't win. You lay under the heavy fur, the smoky smell of the fireplace lingering in your nose, and at this moment you noticed something else. No one will take off all their clothes. In this era, keeping warm is not just about pajamas or loose pajamas. It's about never taking off the armor to keep warm. The clothes turned into bedding. The bedding turned into clothes. The two become blurred until you can hardly tell the end of one from the beginning of the other. Contemporary records remind us that people in the Middle Ages often slept neatly, or at least wore several layers of linen and wool. This layer of clothing retains precious heat. In the severe cold of January, peeling them off is a luxury that few people can afford. Some chronicles even describe travelers sleeping in boots, hats and cloaks, unwilling to expose an inch of flesh to the cold air. This seems unimaginable for our modern bedtime rituals. But for them, this is very practical. Imagine yourself crawling into a bumpy straw mattress, still wearing your wool corset, pulling up your stockings, and perhaps with a cape over your shoulders. This piece of cloth is very rough, sewn on your side. But it is unimaginable that another option is to use bare skin to resist the cold air. Even nobles with down beds would wear several layers of clothes to keep warm. Once the cold comes, they will change their satin pajamas for wool ones. One strange practice recorded in the family guide is to sleep with the belt still fastened, and even a knife tied around the waist, because unfastening the belt means exposing the skin to the cold. Imagine turning over in bed, hearing the jingle of the belt buckle, and feeling the sharp edge of the blade piercing your thigh. This is not consolation. They don't expect comfort. This is survival. Researchers still have a fierce debate over the extent of this stratification. Some people believe that farmers hardly take off their clothes in winter and wear the same outerwear day and night until spring. Others believe that, at least for hygiene reasons, underwear is occasionally changed. The facts may vary by region and degree of poverty. But the common point is quite obvious. Your medieval knights have never been nude. This smell is hard to ignore. The wool has absorbed sweat, smoke and rain for several days and no longer whispers to each other. Fresh. Crawling in bed while rest means bringing all the scents of the day into the shared bed. Imagine 6 corpses each wrapped in an unwashed coat, tightly pressed together. The smell of musk is very pungent, mixed with the smoke from a big fire and the faint scent of animal fur. You wrinkled your nose, but you also realize that once the cold leaves your bones, the smell will soon become the background. For the rich, sleeping dressed is a sign of modesty. Guests' beds are usually shared with strangers, so sleeping in layers can retain some sense of etiquette. Visiting merchants might climb onto the nobleman's guest bed and lie stiffly beside him. Both of them were wearing corsets to avoid the embarrassment of exposed skin. This is a kind of warmth, but also a social etiquette. This is another strange thing. Some people sew themselves into winter clothes, sew the seams with thick thread, which actually turns the clothes into a second skin. They grow freely in spring. Imagine that when you finally get rid of that layer of hair, you will feel both relieved and disgusted. The skin beneath was pale and the clothes were covered with dirt. This is the price of keeping warm. You can almost hear the sound of wool rubbing against each other as your body moves in the dark. The sound of coarse cloth rubbing against the skin. The rustling of the cape, layer upon layer. The fingers were still wearing gloves. The toes were still wrapped in rough stockings. And the head was still wrapped in a linen hat. The only exposed parts are the nose and cheeks, which often turn red due to the cold. Even so, people might wrap an extra piece of cloth around their faces to prevent frostbite. In noble families, bedding sometimes became luxurious, covered with silk or fur, but essentially, the principle remained unchanged. Put on the yarn. An embroidered robe may overshadow the practicality of warm underwear, but warmth is always the top priority. Imagine a lady in a manner covering herself with a silk quilt. Below her, she is also wearing two linen blouses, woolen stockings and a hat with ruffles. Beauty is a mask. Reality is isolation. The psychological aspect is also very important. Going to bed dressed blurs the line between day and night. Sleep is more about endurance than relaxation. You never sweat all day. You couldn't escape the smoke stuck to your hair. In a sense, the winter of the Middle Ages was a long-lasting and continuous survival behavior, and even rest was a battle in wool and linen. However, comfort can still be found. Hierarchy gives people a sense of security. The children were wrapped into many clothes and slept very soundly. Their little limbs were stiff in the wrapping. The adults were still wearing boots, huddled together, warming each other up and feeling at ease. It wasn't endurance that made them fall asleep. This is because they know they have survived another day and have not been frozen to death. Now, you can feel the weight of your coat pressing on your chest. When you imagine the scene, you roll gently. The fabric rubs against the fur on your body, and the boots rub against someone else's calves. It's crowded, uncomfortable, and not at all fresh here, but it's warm and located in the desolate heart of a medieval winter. Warmth is more important than any other consideration. That woolen coat still scratches your skin. The fur on your shoulders is very heavy, but even so, you will still feel a chill. The airflow meanders through the gaps of the blinds and the cracks in the wooden wall. At this point, you will notice that the bed itself is not a simple flat plate. This is a structure, a small world used for storing heat. The curtains surround it. The thick cloth is draped over the wooden frame, forming a cocoon within a cocoon. Manuscripts and family records show that many medieval families, even those other than the nobility, used bed curtains. They are not purely decorative. They are essential tools for keeping warm. In a room where smoke was slowly rising from the fireplace and winter air was seeping through the windows, a bed wrapped in fabric turned it into a tent for survival. As soon as the curtains fall, the space shrinks into a pocket filled with human body heat. Imagine yourself lying on such a curtained bed. The fabric is fair lined with coarse wool or linen. It is a faint smell of smoke, perhaps because it was hung by the stove to dry earlier. Once the curtains are drawn, the sound is blocked out, so the howling of the wind becomes distant, almost like the waves on a distant coast. The flickering candles outside softened, and the cold air ceased to mercilessly crawl across your face. It won't be long before you can feel the warmth. A strange little custom emerged from the existing descriptions. During the day, children sometimes play hide and seek among these curtains, turning the necessities they rely on for survival at night into playrooms. You can imagine the giggles of children, the ripples on the fabric when they hide in, and the angry voices of parents reminding them that these curtains are not toys, they are protection. Experts continue to discuss how common exquisite curtain beds are among different social classes. Some people believe that only the rich have elaborately decorated, fully enclosed poster beds, while royal families manage them with simple wooden frames and as much fabric as possible. Others, however, point out that rules and lists indicate that middle-class families have at least invested in part of the hanging, suggesting that warmth is worth the expense. The furniture that survived from that period supports both viewpoints. A range of solutions from rough bed sheets to beams to elaborately carved and gilded canopies. The sensory experience of a curtained bed is easily evoked. The air quieted down, mingled with the sense of wool, sweat and rush grass. The sound of breathing echoes gently, as if you were in a cave. Outside you can hear low voices, footsteps, or the sound of an animal moving restlessly. But in your little cocoon, everything is very quiet. The world shrinks until all you know is warmth. The fabric brushed against your cheeks, and the chests of those beside you rose and fell. Curtains also give people a rare illusion of privacy. In a family where a room has multiple functions, the curtained bed is the closest thing to one's own room. Imagine living with your siblings, parents and servants, all within easy reach, and then drawing the curtains, you suddenly find yourself in a secluded darkness. The lovers were whispering behind them. Oh, children tell secrets and travelers hold their wallets tighter. For many people, curtains are more than just fabric. This is a boundary between the self and the world, although it is very thin. In the rooms of the nobility, curtains became a symbol of prestige. Around the bed hung hunting or saint tapestries, which were exquisitely embroidered and shone even in the dim candlelight. Every night, the servants carefully tidy them up and pull them up like stage handlers before a performance. Sleeping in such a bed not only keeps you warm but also brings you wealth. You might imagine a nobleman leaning against an embroidered icon, breathing clearly visible in the cold air, while beyond the fabric, his guards huddled on benches, only wearing rough cloaks. The embrace of the curtains contains some profound psychological factors. The nights in the Middle Ages were neither quiet nor empty. Here, the sound of a brook, the rustling, the barking of dogs in the distance, the croaking of owls, the howling of the wind, and perhaps even the disturbing cries of neighbors fill the air. Shut yourself in a small cave and blur these sounds. The human soul yearns for rest and attaches itself to that oppressive silence, just as it attaches itself to warmth. You can feel right now that feeling of being wrapped up, not only wrapped in cloth, but also calmly wrapped. Another strange thing is that some beds are embedded in the wall, just like box beds with sliding blinds instead of curtains. These loves turn sleeping into an act, almost like digging a hole, crawling into a wooden compartment and locking oneself inside. The result is the same warmth, privacy and sense of security. The travelers' descriptions of them were full of amazement, both fascinated and uneasy, as if you had entered a coffin, hoping to come out alive in the morning light. In your imagination, you touched the fabric with your hand, feeling the rough wheat beneath your fingertips, and occasionally grasped the loose threads. When others climb onto the bed, the curtains sway gently. Before the warmth returns, the cold air in the room will tremble for a short while. The thick air was filled with the smell of wool, human breathing, and perhaps even faint resin smoke remaining in the fibers. You close your eyes and it feels like a retreat. The outside world is still howling in the frost, but in this enclosed shadow, you are protected. This is the genius craftsmanship of the Middle Ages. It's not about inventing a central heating system, nor about completely conquering the cold, but about building tiny survival bases on hostile nights. Every curtain, every small hole, every makeshift fabric wall is not so much for luxury as to create a space where warmth can grow and fear can vanish. This is not elegance. That is patience woven from cloth and hope. The fabric wall on the bed falls silently beside you, but the warmth vanishes in an instant. The larger room was still very cold. The once blazing flames now only had the faint glow of embers left. In many families, the stove is the true heart of the home, not only for cooking but also for spending the night. Where you sleep depends on where the fire is. For countless families, this means squeezing beside the fire, or even on the floor next to it, to keep your breathing warm at night. Otherwise, there is a risk to your life. Chroniclers of that time often noticed how farmers and servants were drawn to the fireplace at night, especially when space or bedding was scarce. There is no feather bed or layered fur, and being close to fire is the only insulating material. Imagine lying on a rush grass floor covered with slate. Your head is only a few inches away from the burning wood. Your face is warm, but your back is cold. The cracking sound of the wood turned into a lullaby, and the faint hissing of the sap bursting of the frames marked your erratic sleep rhythm. One odd habit recorded in travel records is that people place entire benches or shelves beside the fireplace and then sleep on them. The wood kept them away from the damp floor while also bringing them close enough to the warmth of the fire. This is not elegant, but it means there will be fewer cold waves when it comes in the morning. You could almost feel the hardness of the table beneath your shoulder blades. The air was filled with smoke and thick ashes. Your nose stung, but your fingers thanked the heat. Experts still hold different opinions on how safe and common this practice is. Some people think that family members usually sleep too close to the flames, and the sparks occasionally ignite the bedding, while others believe that most people only dare to approach when the flames have burned down to just embers. Archaeological evidence of the charred floor and the arrangement of the fireplace provides clues, but it is not certain. It is obvious that despair sometimes prevails over caution. Close your eyes and feel the details. The air was filled with a strong smell of wood smoke, sticking to your hair, clothes and blankets, until it became a part of you. Occasionally, sparks would burst out, shooting a brief orange spray into the darkness. The shadows danced on the walls, giving the room an almost magical feeling, or perhaps a haunted one. The warmth of the fire calms you down, but from time to time, a piece of wood moves, and a dazzling light passes over your face, waking you up and making you check if there is any fire nearby. Sleep here is never deep. It is cautious, tentative, and a deal made with fire. In wealthier families, stoves come in various forms. There were huge fireplaces in the hall. When they were not there, they were so large that several people were needed to carry them. They burned all night long, but even so, the heat rarely reached the farthest corners of the room. Servants often spread out their bedding near the fire, forming rows of corpses, just like the spokes of a wheel, with the fire in the center. Meanwhile, the male protagonist and his wife retreated to the curtained bed in the adjacent room. It was still very cold on the bed, but there was a tapestry and a fire basin as cushions. Irony is obvious. Sometimes the servants slept by the fire, which was warmer than the master sleeping in a well-ventilated stone house. For temples, the rules are even stricter. The monks were required to endure the cold, with strict self-discipline and sleep on hard beds in dormitories without heat. However, even there, the fireplace sometimes serves a quiet function. According to the records of the northern monastery, fathers would sneak into the kitchen or the infirmary at night to keep warm with embers, which violated strict regulations but maintained their health. You can almost imagine the gentle rustling of sandals on stones, the rustling of robes, and the sense of guilt when hands reach for the faint coals of fire. There is another side to the close relationship with fire, and that is risk. Many medieval records mention houses that burned at night, with flames burning on wick straw mats or wooden beams. A warm source may also bring about death. Families sleeping by the fireplace are aware of this every night. To balance the relief of the summer heat and the fear of facing smoke and chaos upon waking up, the smell of charred wood in the morning air reminded every neighbor that sleeping in the fire was a gamble. However, the significance of this fire is not merely material. It has a sense of protection, almost spiritual. In folk tales, embers are believed to ward off ghosts at night. Cooling the stove is regarded as both harmful to health and inauspicious. Before going to bed, every household carefully builds a fire, covers the embers with ashes, and keeps them burning until dawn. Imagine a parent carefully raking coal, whispering prayers, and then leading their children to lie nearby. Embers not only become heat, but also the guardians of the family. You can feel the ashes beneath your hands, listening to the sound of the gentle breeze blowing into the chimney. Savor the taste of smoke on the tip of the tongue. Someone is snoring softly beside you. Another person coughed because the air was getting thicker and thicker. Outside, wolves might howl in the distance, but their cries are drowned out by the continuous hum of fire. Curl up tighter, adjust your body so that your toes touch the warmest heat zone, and at the same time, raise the hair on your back to resist the cold seeping from the floor. It is imperfect. Although it's not comfortable compared to frostbite, it still feels very luxurious. Think of that little child. He stared wide-eyed at the afterglow of the embers, slowly falling asleep, believing that as long as the flames were still burning, morning would come. Think of that old farmer who tossed and turned at night. Whenever the warmth subsided, he would move closer and complain in his sleep about the shortage of wood. Think of that exhausted traveler, collapsing on the floor of a stranger's kitchen, content to rest in the smoke and shadows, for at least this is not an open road. You will realize that for people in the Middle Ages, fireplaces were not merely furniture or technology. It is itself the axis of life. During the day, it cooks. At night, it retains its breath. Its crackling sound is the voice of survival. Its smoke, the taste of a sense of belonging. Sleeping beside it is an admission of the fragility and tenacity of survival in a world as deadly as cold and hunger. So you settle down in your imagination, with a thin blanket draped over your shoulders and your body curled up towards the burning coal lumps. Warmth caresses one side of your face, while the other side stiffens in the cold. Sleep is intermittent, disrupted by sparks and the movement of wood, but it still came. The fire in the stove flickered gently, a lullaby older than memory. The frost outside the door still lingered, at least tonight outside. The glow of the embers vanished behind your eyes. You imagined yourself waking up in a different residence, not a smoke-filled peasant cottage, but a towering stone castle. At first glance, you might think that noble families would enjoy perfect warmth, wrapped in luxury and isolated from the hardships of the outside world. However, when you pushed open the heavy oak door, a cold gust of air greeted you. The fact is that castles are colder than most cottages. Their stone walls are large, ventilated and warm up very slowly. The comfort here does not come from the architecture, but from the craftsmanship, from the continuous accumulation of fabrics and fire. The records of the real estate list remind us that the Grand Hall is equipped with huge fireplaces, sometimes large enough to accommodate a person standing inside. The wood, thicker than a human leg, burned brightly. However, the heat only spread a few feet before dissipating on the cold stones. Beyond the dancing lights, shadows cling to the corners. The high ceiling trapped the smoke above, leaving the people below in a cold and gloomy darkness. Imagine feasting and drinking in such a space. Even if the grilled meat is steaming on the table, your breathing is still clearly visible. Despite the raging fire nearby, your fingertips remain numb. One strange detail mentioned in the record is the use of portable braising, with metal baskets filled with charcoal or glowing coal being brought into the room to increase the local temperature. The servants pulled them out of the fireplace, being very careful not to let the sparks fly onto the rush grass. Imagine a noble woman lifting her skirt and warming herself on a brazier, with her feet still trembling beneath layers of linen and fur. When charcoal is smoldering, the air is filled with the smell of iron, ashes and a faint sulfur. Its warmth is subtle enough to relax your body. Experts still disagree on how effective these measures are. Some people believe that wall hangings, tapestries and wooden paneling have transformed an originally cold room into a rather comfortable place. Others, however, believe that these are merely symbolic consolations, as there is still air flowing in through the cracks of arrows and doors. The debate continues, but everyone agrees that the huge stone wall absorbs the cold like a sponge and radiates it back into the night. Imagine walking into a noble's bedroom. Thick tapestries depicting hunting scenes or religious patterns are hung on the walls, not only for display but also for insulation. The floor was scattered with rush grass sprinkled with herbs to mask the dampness and smell of smoke. In the middle was a huge bed, tall and carved, with the curtains tightly drawn. You climbed onto its feather-stilled mattress and sank deep, only to find that your nose was still pricked by the cold air. Even in this private paradise, the castle remains a stone cave, indifferent to your comfort. There is a special practice, sometimes mentioned in family manuals, which is to warm the bed sheets before going to bed. The servants spread out blankets beside the fire and even pressed heated irons on them, bringing a bed that was slightly warm in the first few precious minutes. You can almost feel its lighting between the warm sheets now, just making that glow disappear quickly and causing you to curl up again. It is a fleeting luxury item that almost vanishes the moment you notice it. Within this cold grandeur, there is also social hierarchy. In the rooms of the nobles and ladies, there were iron basins and beds covered with fur, while their guards and servants often slept in the corridors, guard rooms, or directly in the halls. Imagine a row of soldiers lying hand in hand on a bench, their cloaks pulled tightly. Every time they shift gears, the clinking of their armor can be heard. The breath they exhale rises like clouds, mingled with the lingering fragrance of light beer on the floor from the evening banquet. They may be warmer than farmers, but it's also hard for them to escape the frost. When you think about them carefully, the contrast in perception will become even more obvious. Nudge the rough tapestry. It's rough under your hands, but it's warmer than a bare stone. Listen, the howling of the wind in the distance pierces through the arrow crevices like a mournful tune. Sniff, the pungent smoke of charcoal is mixed with the musk of the damp fur carpet. Look, your breath floats in front of you in a room designed for comfort. This is a paradox. You live surrounded by wealth, but you can never escape the rule of cold tranquility. A visiting merchant described waking up in a noble castle with frost stuck to his blinds. He said that the water in the wash basin froze overnight, and even 3 blankets and a fur cloak couldn't stop his teeth from fighting. It vividly reminds us that magnificence does not guarantee comfort, and even the rich have learned to endure the winter nights with a tenacious spirit. However, there is something almost solemn in this entrance. Imagine a grand banquet ending amid laughter and joy, with only embers remaining from the fire and guests dispersing to their respective rooms. The servants were busy storing coal, drying curtains and carrying braziers. The nobles hid on firm honest-covered curtain beds, while the guards stomped their feet to keep warm under prolonged surveillance. The cold united them together, a silent opponent not caring about titles or wealth. The symbol of coldness in the castle is very profound. Stones symbolize eternity, strength and defense. However, it will also trap you in a cold prison. Every effort to fight against nature, fire, brazier, tapestry, is an acknowledgement that power cannot drive out nature. Even when the king went to bed, his nose was red and his fingers stiff, and their crowns could not withstand the frost. You lie in your mind, on a castle bed with curtains, feeling the layered weight of the quilt and fur pressing down. The air inside was stuffy and breathing was heavy, but outside the fabric, the room was still large and cold. You drift in knowledge. Despite all the efforts of mankind, winter still rules the night. There exists a strange consolation in this understanding. Patience itself is victory. Whether you are a farmer by the stove or a nobleman behind embroidered curtains, the walls of the castle vanished from your imagination, and you found yourself back in a low hut, leaning tightly against a straw mattress, which had clumped under to many corpses. In this world, warmth is not evenly distributed. It is carefully arranged and divided by age, size, and responsibility. The children were stuffed inside like live coal in a fire, while the parents formed the outer circle. A family bed is not merely for rest. This is a building for survival. Family narratives and folk tales clearly show that young children often sleep at the foot of the bed, with their small bodies gathering near their parents' legs. In some cases, the baby is tightly wrapped up, snuggling up to the mother, while the elder brother or sister curls up at the father's feet. Reasoning is practical. Smaller bodies generate less heat but absorb it quickly, so arranging them like warm stones helps maintain balance on the bed. Now imagine it. Another lay in the middle, her arms resting on a wrapped baby, with 2 children snuggling up on her hips. At the other end of the classroom, Near his parents' feet, a boy was curled up, his head pressed against the rough woolen socks, absorbing heat like a sponge. It's not charming, but it's very effective. The bed turned into a living circuit, and warmth was silently and unconsciously transferred from one person's body to another's. An unusual practice occasionally mentioned in parish records is that children are sometimes deliberately used as foot warmers. Parents admit that keeping their children at their feet makes it easier for them to endure the night. Imagine that when your toes are pressing against a half-minus asleep, half-minus awake toddler, he is seeking the warm comfort of an adult. To us, this sounds unfair, but to them, it's just part of family responsibility. Researchers are still debating just how widespread this practice is. Some people think that children are always placed in the warmest part of the bed at the very center, while others notice that little kids tremble at the edge of the bed. Facts may change according to the needs of families. In the depth of winter, practicality often trumps gentleness. Love is not absent. It is merely expressed to the common survival of the group. The sensory details of these nights come alive in the imagination. Their small limbs are tightly pressed against your body. The child's breath is burning your cheeks. The faint whining sound as the blanket slipped. The parents kept stirring and pulling the quilt back to its original position, whispering softly in the darkness. The smell was a mixture of wool, sweat and the scent of childhood, yogurt, damp straw, and the faint sweetness of hair washed a few weeks ago. And the smell wafted towards you, often pleasant and full of humanity. In noble families, such arrangements might be equally intimate. There are records describing wet nurses, servants, and even favored children sharing beds with their mistresses. A noble woman might place a baby beside her and cover it with a splendid quilt, while the older child would sleep with her attendants. The position of each sleeper reflects the grade in temperature. Those who are closest to their mothers or mistresses are cherished, while others are on the periphery. Even in the castle, the foot of the bed is crowded. This generational division also has psychological reasons. Sleep is not lonely. It is public and blends into the rhythm of family life. Children have become accustomed to hearing their parents breathing, the body movements of their siblings, and the occasional whispered conversations during their growth. Privacy is almost unknown, but intimate relationships remain unchanged. A bed is more than just furniture. It is the cradle of memory. Here, people sing songs, tell stories and soothe their fears. Imagine the sounds of such a night. Humming a lullaby gently, a child was coughing, dragging his little feet, trying to find a warmer place. The parent's hands patted gently in the darkness, resolving the dispute without words. Someone turned around and pulled the blanket tighter, making a rustling sound and allowing another blanket to be temporarily exposed. This is a dance of sleep, endless adjustments, endless negotiations. There are also darker notes. The records remind us that accidental suffocation has not been unheard of. With so many bodies crowded together, babies sometimes slip down under the heavy quilt or get crushed while moving restlessly. Pastors and midwives warned mothers to stay vigilant. But in a world where there are no other options, risks are tolerable. The act of huddling together for warmth itself is also dangerous. A peculiar custom has emerged from some rural traditions. Tell ghost stories to children at night to keep them awake. The parents warned that if they twisted or kicked off the covers, the ghosts would take them away. These stories are not so much supernatural truths as a way to keep quiet in a crowded sleeping space. You could almost hear that stern whisper, "Lie down well," or "the night which will find you." Discipline alone cannot achieve this, but fear can keep the blanket steady. All these scenes have always been with you. A pile of blankets made of wool and animal skins covered a pile of corpses, revealing little faces one by one, just like flowers on a jumbled meadow. From a modern perspective, it seems chaotic and gigphonic and even cruel. But to them, it is safe. Each little corpse at the foot of the bed proved that everyone shared warmth and that the family had spent another night together. So in your imagination, you curl up even tighter, feeling the child's heel gently touching your chest, feeling the low giggle of someone whispering a joke in the dark, feeling the soft sigh of your mother pulling up the blanket. The cold outside still mercilessly pressed down on the walls. But in this crowded and noisy cocoon, warmth still exists. It is fragile, fleeting, and imperfect, but it is already enough. The low, clucking sounds of children at the foot of the bed gradually fade from your imagination, and you turn to another survival technique that doesn't involve the body or fur, but rather carefully controlling the heat itself. Every breath causes frost to form in the air. Even layered clothes cannot dispel the chill. So every household has come up with a clever solution. Heat the stones or bricks in the fire and then bring the warmth to the bed, just like catching the sun. Both family handbooks and archaeological discoveries have confirmed this practice. Smooth stones or thick bricks were placed beside the stove until they emitted invisible heat, and then wrapped in cloth or stuffed into wooden boxes to prevent burns. Hide under the blanket. They were comfortable expressions for several hours in a row. You can imagine that after trudging through the cold and muddy ground for a whole day, stepping on it is a kind of relief. Suddenly, a warm current surges over your body, almost enough to make you forget the wind on your neck. A particularly strange detail survived from the rural narrative. Some families use hollowed minus-out earthenware jars filled with embers sealed with LIDs as temporary bedspreads. They emit a faint light in the darkness, giving off both heat and a thin wisp of smoke. A smell of charred, silent ashes would linger beneath the quilt. Imagine this mixed feeling, where the comforting warmth of the tones blend with the spicy and fiery smell in the nose. Comfort is always mixed with discomfort. Researchers still have differences of opinion on just how common these bed fights are. Some people believe that only families with excessive fuel have the ability to risk wasting calories on stones rather than on meals. Others point out that even the poorest huts may have rocks and embers, which makes it a common trick in cold regions during winter. The truth might lie somewhere in between. This is a simple solution that varies depending on wealth and geographical location. You tend to favor sensory imagery. The stone wrapped in rags looks rough under your fingers, and the edges are warm enough to sting. You stuffed it at your feet, sighing as the heat seeped into your aching tones. The faint smell of smoke clung to the linen, reminding you that this warmth was stolen from the fire just a moment ago. For a while, you don't have to curl up into a ball to sleep. In noble families, this practice evolved into elegance. The servants carried shiny copper pots, or pans filled with coal, and slid them between each layer of bedding on the bed before the master went to sleep to warm the bedding. Imagine the hissing sound of a hot pan skimming over the linen, and the faint scorch marks left by a servant who has lingered for too long. The bed gave off a faint metallic smell, reminding one of the device that transformed the cold sheet into a brief warmth. The guests expressed their envy for this practice, although some also warned that accidents could occur and that an overturned pot might set the bed on fire before anyone could react. The danger of fire is always lurking nearby. Although bed warmers are very comfortable, they can sometimes cause minor fires. The chronicler recorded the story of the hut being lit up at night. Because a stone cracked or a jar was knocked over, the flames would spread on the straw mat. Families weigh risks and relief almost always prevails. You can imagine a mother praying softly before tucking a warm stone under her child's blanket, hoping it would last until dawn and nothing unexpected would happen. The psychological comfort provided by such items should not be underestimated. A child will feel safer and more confident to get through the night by holding a heated brick under layer upon layer of wool. Stones have become more than just worn. It is a kind of amulet, reminding us that no matter how insignificant, this family has the strength to resist the cold outside. Even after the heat subsides, the memory of it is enough to soothe the soul and bring the restless body to sleep. Think of these sounds of the night. My father poked the stove top with an iron rod to select a suitable stone. Embers crackled and sparks flew. The soft hissing sound of the cloth when heated echoed gently. Then came the dragging footsteps. The stone was carried across the room, carefully preventing it from falling to the ground. The children sat up eagerly, waiting for their turn to feel its glow. The entire ceremony almost turned into a ceremony. Before settling down again, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Another strange phenomenon is that in some areas, people believe that heated stones can not only keep warm but also treat diseases. They press them on painful joints or stomachs, hoping that the absorbed flames can drive away diseases. Sleeping under such a stone under the quilt is regarded as both practical and medicinal. Imagine a grandmother holding it to her chest, muttering about its comforting power, while her grandchildren are laughing at how tightly she holds it. It forms a sharp contrast with modern amenities. We have thermos flasks, electric blankets and radiators that buzz without thinking. But here, on a medieval night, every bit of heat was earned by oneself. You stand up from the haystack, step barefoot on the cold rush grass, choose a stone, heat it up to prevent it from cracking. You hold it as if it were a treasure, cautious and devout, for it is the only thing standing between you and the cold silence. As the night deepens in your imagination, you curl up in the blanket, your toes touching the fading warmth of the stones. The fire opposite the room had burned down to ashes, and the frost on the window frame was creeping down silently. But beneath the quilt, you can still sense the specter of heat, which is the last remaining flame. It calms you down, stabilizes you, and leads you into restless dreams. A few hours later, when you woke up, your feet weren't old again. Instinctively, you reached for the stone, even though it had already gone cold. That posture, the one that still unconsciously sought warmth long after it had vanished, captured the essence of a medieval winter night. Comfort is always fleeting, always temporary and always fragile, but this is already enough. Every stone, every embers, every withered light has carried people through night after night, until spring finally returns. The warmth of the stone vanished. In your imagination, you heard low whispers and the rustling of wooden cups against the table. Before covering themselves with blankets, many families strengthen themselves with drinks. This is not merely a ritual. This is survival. Cider, moldy wine. None of these are indulgences, they are shields against the cold. People believed that alcohol could warm the blood, and this belief was sufficient to influence bedtime throughout medieval Europe on the nights of January. Records from that time showed that even children drank wheat sprout beer, a lighter beer safer than water and suitable for daily consumption. In the evening, adults usually drink stronger beer or heat it up with spices, honey, or herbs. Imagine you are sitting by the stove, holding a wooden cup in your hand. The liquid is steaming slightly, and the bitterness is masked by cinnamon and cloves. You took a small sip, and the warmth flowed down your throat and into your chest. A few minutes later, the chill gradually dissipated. A strange tradition is retained in the description of winter banquets. Monks and townspeople sometimes pour hot beer or wine over toasted bread to make a soup mixture known as a bosette. Honey makes it sweet, bread makes it thick. It fills the stomach but makes people drowsy. You can almost taste it now. Sweet, granular, heavy. It feels like your eyelids get heavier with every spoonful. By modern standards, this is not delicious, but it can effectively help you fall asleep. Historians remain divided on whether alcohol truly raised body temperature or merely created an illusion of warmth. Some people believe that the long-term cooling of the body offsets the temporary fever. Others, however, believe that a moderate amount of strong alcohol can provide sufficient calories and comfort, thereby making an impact. The debate continues, but it is certain that countless medieval people believed in this effect and were willing to risk their health in exchange for a warmer night. The sensory details of such a night are easy to imagine. The smell of yeast rose from the cup, and the smell of earth was pungent. Our lips are slightly pricked by the burning edges. This liquid sits heavily in your stomach, wrapped in a layer of almost physical warmth, almost a protection for you. The family members whispered softly, their voices softening from drinking. The shadows swayed on the wall, and the cold outside didn't feel so terrifying anymore. In noble families, beverages became more refined. Exotic spices such as nutmeg or imported sugar are added to the moldy wine, making this act both warm and showy. Imagine all awed holding a golden goblet with steam rising gently from the rim and the air filled with the fragrance of lilacs. The servants walked up slowly with the fruiters in hand to refill the guests' cups, and the guests laughed even louder. The cold still persisted, seeping in through the cracks of doors and arrows, but for several hours the illusion of warmth persisted. Strangely enough, bedtime drinks are sometimes paired with religious blessings. Some parish priests suggest having one last sip of light beer before going to bed to pray for God's protection and to keep the body warm. Others, however, warn against over-indulgence and equating intoxication with sin. The tension between necessity and morality plays out every night, as both men and women consider their cups to be medicine rather than evil. You can almost hear the murmuring prayers, half sincere and half excuses. Social aspect should also be taken into consideration. Sharing a beer before going to bed is like sharing a blanket, bringing family members together. Cups were passed around, stories were exchanged, and laughter was enveloped under the low, smoke-filled rafters. For children, sweet residue can serve as a treat, the last comfort before climbing into the crowded bed. For adults, the ceremony not only offers warmth, but also ensures that no one faces the night alone. Danger is real. Anarchists point out that drunkards sometimes fall asleep too close to the fire, and that clothes or bedding can be eliminated by the flames. Others, after stumbling out of their homes, were trapped in barns or fields, deceived by a false sense of warmth. However, even at such risks, this approach was still persisted in. In the days without central heating, a hot drink was worth a try. Imagine the sounds of such a night. One owing to fast. His children giggled. A mother hummed a tune softly, her voice gently stirring the herbs into the pot. The jingling sound of the wooden cups echoed. The sound of a large spoon rubbing against the iron pot. The shaking when the liquid is poured into the cup. The fire burst out, sparks flying everywhere, and the bone-chilling wind outside was temporarily forgotten. The psychological weight of this ritual is as important as the physical weight. Drinking something hot before going to bed will tell your body that you are being taken care of and feel comfortable even in the dark. Even if the actual warmth fades away quickly, its memory lingers on, carrying you across the threshold into the dream. The nights of the Middle Ages were full of uncertainties. There were wolves outside, the ghost imagined hungry, but in the process of sipping together, there was a kind of comfort. You close your eyes, but the taste of the spiced beers still lingers on your tongue. Your body has become heavier and your thinking has slowed down. Around you, your family members moved a little, pulled the blanket tighter, and sighed as they fell asleep. The embers emitted a faint glow. The cup is left empty on the table. Outside, frost covers the earth, but inside, the warmth of drinks and company makes you believe that you can live until dawn. When you lie down, the aroma of spiced beer lingers on your tongue. Your body is filled with warmth, but it won't last long. Under your feet, the mattress keeps moving, unclumping. It's neither a down quilt nor a down blanket. It is made by thickly spreading straw on wooden frames, and sometimes on bare floors. For farmers across Europe, this is a standard bed that is frequently replaced and replenished whenever the harvest permits. Records from memorial records and family handbooks confirm that straw, hay or bundles of dried rush grass are the most common sleeping surfaces in ordinary households. These materials are easy to obtain and collect, and at least for a short period of time, they can be isolated from the frozen ground. Fresh straw crackled beneath the corpse, giving off a faint grassy smell, almost sweet. This is a comfort in the first few nights before the dampness and fatigue arrive. A special habit often mentioned in the household notes of the Middle Ages was the seasonal variation of straw. In many places, rush grass needs to be replaced 2 to 3 times a year, sometimes as part of household cleaning. However, in the middle stage, the once elastic bed became flat, dirty and infested with insects. Imagine lying on such a surface. The straw was flattened into hard ridges, and the smell was no longer fresh but sour, carrying the sense of mold and sweat. However, this is still better than the biting stone floor. Scholars continue to discuss just how effective these straw beds are. Some people believe that when kept dry and hydrated, they provide good insulation, keeping sleepers away from cold ground. Others insist that they are mailing nests for fleas and pests, spreading more discomfort than warmth. The discovery of the dense rush grass during archaeological excavations at medieval sites suggests both possibilities. The boundary between comfort and intrusion is often merely a matter of maintenance. Sensory experiences are easy to describe. You rolled sideways, the straw creaked beneath you, and a sharp strop oaked your hip. Every shift change raises dust, itches your nose and makes you sneeze gently in the dark. The smell of smog still lingers faintly, now mixed with smoke and the musk of corpses. This is not pleasant, but it is familiar. In a world lacking certainty, familiarity itself can bring comfort. A strange twist has emerged in some documents. Wealthy farmers sometimes mix herbs into the straw, not only to enhance the fragrance but also to repel insects. Lavender, mint or mugwort leaves may be scattered among the rush grass. Imagine lying on such a bed. The faint scent of mint pierced through the strong smell of smoke and sweat. This is a small luxury provided by nature. At least for a few nights, you can breathe easily. In contrast to noble families, their straw mats were laid and placed in linen boxes, sewn together to accommodate the fillers. The servants would regularly fill these beds with water and let them rest to ensure they were softer and more durable. The rustling of the wheat stalks weakened and the smell was suppressed. The nobles might never feel the sharp sting of the stems protected by flax and extra padding. However, even in the castle, straw remained the hidden foundation beneath the silk and the quilt. The difference does not lie in what is in the bed, but in how it is packaged and updated. The symbolic meaning of the straw bed also lingers in medieval culture. The phrase "to be laid in straw" is associated with poverty, humility, and even childbirth. In the story of the birth of Jesus, Christ himself is described as lying in a hay trough. In that era when straw was the most common bedding, this image resonated strongly. This is both a true reality and a spiritual metaphor, reminding farmers and nobles to survive on cold nights. Think of the sounds of such a night: the gurgling of the wooden frame under the moving body, the creaking of the straw breaking under pressure, the faint rustling every time someone turns over, and the dust being blown into the air. Occasionally there would be a squeaking sound, indicating that a mouse was building a nest below. Be brave to share the warmth. Sleep here is never quiet and never pure. It is stratified from the real world. However, there is also tenderness hidden in the straw. The parents stuffed the child into the softest place near the center. The couples carved out space for themselves on the uneven surface, creating a hollow space that fits their bodies. When straw gets stuck around a child's neck, they might giggle, but tired parents will calm them down. These details, which seemed mundane to them, now paint a vivid picture of resilience. Another strange thing is that travelers often carry small bundles of straw in their backpacks to ensure they have a clean layer of straw wherever they sleep. Imagine that you come to a hotel, spread your straw on the floor next to a stranger, and occupy a small warm spot in the crowded room. The rustling sound made when dozens of bundles were spread out must have been a medieval night chorus. When you imagine yourself lying down now, the straw moves again under your weight. It's uneven but warmer than stone. That's the most important thing. The quilt above you might be worn out. This room as well mine is ventilated, but at least you are not on a frozen earth. The mattress breathes with you, whispering softly with each turn. Its imperfections constantly remind us that survival is never smooth sailing or silent. You close your eyes, press your cheek against a sack stuffed with rush grass, and inhale its faint grassy smell. Outside the house, the wind was still pounding against the walls fiercely. But here, on your humble straw bed, you find enough warmth to drift into the restless yet necessary dreams. The straw mat rustled beneath your feet. For a moment it seemed that the thought of warmth was enough. But when the door opens, you realize that you are not the only one looking for heat. On the road, in monasteries, and in taverns across Europe, public sleeping halls attract travelers, pilgrims, servants and monks to live together in cramped dormitories. In the eyes of modern people, the idea of sharing a room with a stranger, sometimes even a bed, can be embarrassing and even worrying. However, on medieval nights, intimacy was not an option. This is necessary. Chroniclers of that period described a large hall where dozens of people might lie shoulder to shoulder on a floor covered with straw, or on narrow trays to spread out their bedding. In the monastery, the quiet rules even extend to the bedrooms of the monks, or are symmetrically arranged according to discipline. Imagine it as a cave hall dimly illuminated by oil lamps. The only sounds were the rustling of the robe and the occasional coughing. Each monk was lying in his clothes, with his headscarf pulled over his head. His breathing was blurred in the cold air. The room was simple, but a large number of corpses created a fragile warmth. This scene is far from being so orderly. Travelers arrived at dusk, tired and cold, and were assigned to spaces on public floors or shared beds. The wooden stool is used as a mattress. The straw was piled up in the corner, and the blankets were often borrowed instead of one's own. You can imagine the smell of workers' sweat, the smell of smoke in the fireplace, and the smell of wet wool being dried by the fire. The snoring mingled with the murmuring dream. The warmth here is real, but so is the chaos. A striking detail emerges in the descriptions of the UAT by foreign tourists. They were surprised by the practice of bundled travel, where unrelated travelers' work rammed into the same blanket. A businessman might find himself running into a stranger in the morning. Such an arrangement is neither romantic nor polite, but is very efficient. Imagine crawling onto the bed with your boots still on and your cloak tightly wrapped around you, only to find someone you've never seen before curled up at the other end of the bed, and then fell asleep. Excitement outweighs embarrassment. Experts are still debating just how common it is to share a bed with strangers. Some people believe that due to limited space, international hotels almost always allow guests to stay together, while others think that wealthier travelers can pay for private arrangements. Both of these viewpoints are reasonable and reveal the vulnerability of comfort in a world where hospitality means survival. Being denied a bed, or even worse, space on the floor, could be a death sentence in winter. The sensory details of these public spaces are vivid. The air becomes thick because of people's breathing, as damp as dozens of lungs. Every cough has an echo. Every sigh would spread throughout the hall. The straw beneath you stung your cheeks, and the blanket faintly gave off the scent of the traveler who had used it before. However, there is a special kind of comfort in the crowd. Surrounded by corpses, you won't be so easily affected by the howling cold wind outside. For monks, public cemeteries have an additional layer of discipline. They rose together to pray at night and filed into the chapel in silence from their trays. Imagine that you are awakened from your restless sleep by the sound of a bell. The tomb chamber suddenly came alive. Feet were dragging back and forth on the cold stones. Torches were burning. The warmth of sleep vanished, replaced by the solemn duty of chanting in the cold choir. The rhythm of dedication outpaces that of rest. This is a strange note in the rules of the monastery. Blankets are sometimes allocated by rank. The older monks were given thicker coverings, while the novices trembled under thinner coverings. This arrangement even reinforces the hierarchy during sleep, reminding people that obedience extends beyond the daytime. You can imagine a novice pulling his cloak tighter, his teeth rattling, and looking enviously at his elder brother dozing peacefully under the thick wool. The hierarchy is formed in coins. Wealthier travelers purchased better spaces that were close to the fireplace and far from the ventilation door. The poor were driven to the wilds, where frost had formed and the straw had become wet. Imagine you are lying there half asleep and half awake, hearing the warm laughter of a wealthy merchant by the fireplace, while you are curled up on a distant wall with a thin blanket and a stiff body. Fairness has almost no place in survival. However, the public auditorium also has a strange sense of intimacy. Tell each other stories before going to bed. The song sings softly in the darkness. The worshipper spoke loudly in a low voice. Strangers became companions for the night. Their shared discomfort bound them together. The smell of smoke and ale, flickering lights, the sound of raindrops tapping on the roof. All of this has become part of a shared experience. Later, I recalled it with a mixture of disgust and nostalgia. The dangers involved should also be taken into consideration. Crowded dormitories are breeding grounds for lice, fleas, and diseases. Sweat, plagues, and even the common cold of the British are all very easy to spread. Their single cough can make everyone in the hall fall ill. When travelers agree to share a bed, the risks they take are not just embarrassment. They risk their own health. However, in winter, it is often unimaginable to reject the warmth of another body. The psychological impact of such a night is worth imagining. In modern times, privacy is sacred, and being alone in sleep is something to look forward to. But here, your survival depends on giving up your privacy, giving up your space, and believing that strangers won't hurt you. Sleep has become an act of faith, a gamble, betting that those lying beside you are as eager to rest as you are. Close your eyes now. Feel the pressure on your body around you. The rustling of straw. Soft snoring. Someone is coughing. Another person was moving under themselves in their dream. The fire at the other end of the hole made a faint cracking sound. Only a few lucky ones can feel the warmth. The thick air was filled with the smell of smoke, sweat and spilled beer. It is neither clean nor comfortable, but it can survive. In the Middle Ages, survival was the only truly important luxury. The crowded inn gradually fades from your mind. Suddenly, you find yourself standing by a twisted small window in a wooden house. The wind whistled sharply, as if trying to squeeze in. Unlike the glass panes we take for granted today, medieval windows were a fragile invention and weren't ever completely sealed. The wisdom of survival does not lie in keeping the cold completely out, but in softening its sharp edge. Documents from family accounts and surviving buildings show that many cabins only have blinds to cover window openings. In the evening they would tighten these ropes and sometimes stuff them with cloth or straw to block the wind. But in slightly wealthier families, the openings would be covered with oil minus soaked parchment or semi-minus transparent sheep horn pieces. These substitutes allow the ghostly light of the sun to come in, but block the most violent wind. Imagine standing by such a window at dawn, with the speaker panel emitting a pale yellow light, its surface covered with cold water droplets, and frost covering the frame with delicate spider webs. One unusual method mentioned in some memorial surveys is to stuff moss or rags into the cracks around the blinds. Every household regards the windows as wounds that need to be bandaged, blocking every gap they can find. You can imagine that your hands are pressing the damp moss into the right place. The smell of the earth is stuck in the room, and the green gradually darkens as it solidifies. It's not very beautiful, but it's effective enough to allow family members to sleep without cold wind blowing on their necks. Experts are still debating just how common corner windows are. Some people claim that they are signs of moderate wealth and can only be owned by prosperous townspeople and minor nobles. Others, however, believe that the distribution is more widespread because horns can be easily obtained from cows and parchment can even be made with very few resources. Facts often seem to become blurred between different regions. It is certain that before the late Middle Ages, glass was a rare, expensive and imported luxury item that only the very wealthy could afford. Take it a step further in imagination. Stroke the rough wooden frame with your hand, and the grains will shatter in your palm. Press the speaker panel with your finger. It's very cool, a bit greasy after processing, and semi-minus transparent. Through it, you can only see a vague outline, the outline of a tree, and the flickering of torches outside. The wind swayed the blinds, making a low moan in the room, but at least it wouldn't blow directly across your bed. But it is sufficient. As emerged in some towns, wealthier families use painted cloth as curtains, decorated with flowers or biblical scenes. They serve both as heat insulation and display, filtering sunlight through color during the day and keeping some of the coldness at night. Imagine that when your breath is covered with frost in the air, a faint rose-minus-colored glow floats above your head, drifting into your sleep. Art and survival are intertwined on a fragile surface. The smell of these coverings filled the entire room. The oil parchment has a faint animalistic scent, sharp and musky. Has its own sour taste. When the panel is heated by the weak sun during the day, the smell becomes stronger. With the addition of smoke, wool and damp straw, the room turned into a cocktail of various odors, unpleasant yet familiar. For sleepers in the Middle Ages, comfort did not mean the absence of discomfort, but rather being able to ignore it. Then comes the sound. The wind was pressing down on the blinds, making them rattle like restless fingers. Raindrops splashed onto the horn, making a faint drum beat. Occasionally, frost will suddenly crack during its formation, just like the clicking sound of a broken branch. These noises seeped into the dreams of those huddled inside, blending with the snoring and whispers of their family members. The nights and the Middle Ages were ever silent. Through the fragile barrier, it is brimming with the vitality of sound. The windows of castles and monasteries are larger, but not necessarily warmer. The arrow slits on the fortress blew the cold air into the room, and the air current reverberating in the corridor was something that no tapestry could completely block. The monks slept in a long row under the windowless windows, and their prayers for patience were as endless as those for God. The nobles hung heavy tapestries or thick wooden shutters, but even so, the chill of morning still spread over the stones. Cold was a balance that humbled both the peasants and the lords. These fragile windows also have symbolic meanings. They let the light in but not clearly offer protection but are uncomfortable. Living behind parchment or sheep's horns means accepting to live in the shadows and enduring imperfection. The sleeping person knows the outside world, but doesn't see it clearly until the blinds are opened. Therefore the nights in the Middle Ages were double darkness. First, there is no sunlight. Due to the pain of imperfection, the vision becomes blurred. Imagine yourself lying on a straw bed, with the curtains drawn on the corner window faintly glowing in the moonlight. The air seeping from the crack brushed against your cheeks, cold and sharp. You pulled the blanket tighter, buried your nose in the wool, and listened to the wind's dejected howling. It tried to break in but failed. The barrier may be thin, but tonight it is impregnable. The fragile victory of fabric, horns and human ingenuity will make you fall asleep again. When another reality intrudes into this never-mind ascending night, the light of the corner window lingers in your mind, pale and ghostly. Ultimately, you might doze off beneath layers of wool and fur, but be awakened by the needs of your body or the responsibilities of household chores. For medieval families, midnight was not a quiet time for sleep. This is a period of interruption, a period of actual need, and sometimes a period of heavy obligation. The family records and medical works of that era remind us that the night pot is a companion at night. Getting up to relieve oneself means leaving the fragile worn kaku. So every household keeps earthenware or wooden jars beside the bed. You imagine clumsily dragging your feet in the dark, the scraping sound as you lift the pot lid, and a brief rise of soreness before the pot slides back under the bed. This is a disturbance to the blanket and the corpse curtain. However, without it, someone would have to trudge into the cold courtyard, which is a much harsher prospect. In some chronicles, there is a strange practice described, that is, using public water kettles in dormitories, especially in temples. Dozens of people relied on shared boats, which were usually cleared by novices at dawn. Imagine a dark hole, the sound of feet stepping on stones, the low clanging of pottery, and a faint smell in the morning air. The silence of the monastery's discipline might have masked the complaints, but this discomfort was widespread. Experts still have differences of opinion on the strictness with which people adhere to their first and second sleep. Segmented rhythm in some texts. A segmented rhythm is described. Some historians believe that waking up around midnight is quite natural and common, while others think it is more prevalent in cities or affluent families. Regardless of the theory, many people in the Middle Ages did indeed struggle in the middle of the night over whether to use a night pot, make a fire, or perform a quick prayer. Sleep is not continuous, but a series of fragile intervals. Imagine the details of the senses. You move in the dark, pushing open the thick curtains around the bed. A cold gust of air immediately hits your face, shocking after the sweltering room. Your bare feet touch the floor. It's wet and cold here. Every step is very painful. Somewhere nearby, the embers in the fireplace cracked open, emitting a faint orange spark. The night pot feels very cold. The glaze is smooth on your hand. A sigh of relief came quickly, but the price was that before you could crawl back into bed, a chill seeped into your bones. In families that need to light a fire, someone will get up at night to pile up the coal. This task often falls on the servant or the father at home. Imagine kneeling by the stove, raking ash on the burning embers and coaxing them until dawn. The smell of smoke fills your nostrils, your eyes sting, and your hands shivering with cold. This is a tiring responsibility, But if it is not done, the fire might go out completely, leaving the family with only the morning of frost. There is a strange sense of intimacy in these interruptions. On the shared bed, when one person moves, others will move too. As soon as the blanket was lifted, the wind came in. Someone was half asleep and half awake, muttering complaints and moaning. The children might SOB. The adults comforted them softly. Then, when the body warmed up again, the entire group fell silent once more. The breathing rhythm has returned, and so has the fragile cocoon. Sleep is a kind of negotiation, constantly broken and then recreated. There is a peculiar anecdote in Traveler's magazine that describes how some families use dogs to guard their night pots. In some areas where theft and pranks are common, people train animals to bark at night if a stranger climbs close to their bed. This is a strange image. Under the bed, there is a pot with a dog curled up beside it. It serves as both an alarm system and a foot warmer. Practicality in the Middle Ages rarely wasted resources. For the nobility, this kind of interruption had a different flavor. The bedroom is sometimes also used as a semi-minus public space, accessible to servants at any time. A lady might be woken up by a fire inspector or by a nanny soothing a baby in a corner. Even the king was not spared. Henry VII himself complained that despite his wealth, he was still disturbed by the wind and noise on cold nights. Imagine lying on a large bed with the curtains drawn, hearing only the cautious footsteps of a servant and the jingling of ironware by the fireplace. Even at the highest level, the sound of midnight breaking in echoes in your mind, the rubbing of iron against coal, the splashing of liquid in the pot, the coughing of children, and the sighing of someone moving straw. Outside, the wind is roaring ceaselessly, but inside, the small noises that humans need mark the true rhythm of the night. Families in the Middle Ages never fell asleep all at once. It drifts in and out, one person staring, always rubbing against another. So you curled up in the bed, your feet icy cold from the rush grass, and your breathing faintly blurred in the darkness around you. The family adjusted a bit and pulled you back to your little nest. It grew warm and slowly, imperfectly. Sleep is intermittent, but each fragment is enough. The night is long, but survival is interrupted time and again. The low footsteps in the darkness vanished from your imagination. You lay down again on that bed with curtains, sharing your breath with the people and animals around you. Then it hit you. The smell. It is everywhere. On medieval nights, warmth was always accompanied by scents. Human sweat, damp wool, smoggy air, sour straw, and musk-scented animals are also companions for warmth. You can't escape it, so you have to learn to endure it. Works from visiting clergy and travelers often mention the spicinces of ordinary families. They described entering a smoggy cabin where the air hardly circulated. Every piece of fabric gave off the same damp and pungent smell. Imagine pulling the blanket to your chin. The wool is coarse and hard, and you inhale a mixture of flaxseed oil, ash and unwashed sheep from the sheep. For us, this is a kind of oppression. For them, this is a normal and unstable background for survival. A strange anecdote appeared in a 14th-century family manual. It is recommended to sprinkle crushed herbs, rosemary, sage, or even dried rose petals on the straw mat in bed to freshen the air. It is believed that these odors can not only repel pests, but also reduce the stench of life. You imagine a mother scattering bunches of lavender on straw, children smiling as they watch the purple flowers shatter, and the air briefly sweetens before it is swallowed up by smoke again. Experts are still debating how sensitive medieval people were to smells. Some people think that continuous exposure will dull their senses. Things that seem unbearable to us, they hardly notice. Others insist that complaining about dilapidated houses or polluted air in ancient custom text messages proves that people have indeed noticed the smell and detest it. In any case, surviving the cold means enduring the things attached to the bedding and clothes. Novelty is a fleeting luxury. It brought warmth. Cleanse your eyes and lean over to enter a state of sensory overload. The room was filled with an air. Every exhalation was like a mist lingering in the air, heavy and damp. The dog at your feet moved a little, releasing a musky smell of fur and dirt. Chickens perched on it, their feathers falling onto the floor. Their smell was pungent and dusty. Someone coughed, and a foul smell of illness wafted over the crowded bed. This is not pleasant, but it is human and alive, proving that warmth has not abandoned you. For the nobility, scents are concealed rather than absent. They stuff sackets between the bed sheets and sometimes light incense before going to bed. Imagine the scent of frankincense or ophiopod blending with woolen fur, creating a strange fusion of the sacred and the secular. They attempt to elevate sleep to a refined level. However, even in the rooms of the castle, the potential smell of smoke and sweat cannot be completely eliminated. One strange practice recorded in medical literature is that people believe unpleasant odors themselves can cause diseases. To allow a circulation, even in winter, families sometimes deliberately open their windows. Imagine this paradox. You spend several hours blocking every vent with moss and rags just to open a gap, because you were afraid that the stench would make you ill. Cold air is pouring in, but you breathe easily. I believe you have driven away the miasma. Smell is powerful. Warmth is associated with pleasant scents and has nothing to do with cleanliness but with familiarity. Children learn to associate the musky scent of straw wool with safety and even love. When a traveler walks into a hotel and smells the stench, he may back off. But after an hour, he will also relax and accept this mixed smell, considering it a common proof of humanity. The smell and heat remind people that they are not alone. Listen to those layers of sounds: the uncle snoring, the quiet lullaby, the crackling of embers, and the occasional rustling when someone turns around. Every sound is accompanied by a wisp of air, a wisp of breath, making a tiny contribution to the atmosphere of the night. You feel it on your skin, and the warm and moist exhaled together is like your arm blanket sticking to your body. Imagine again at dawn, the door opens and fresh air finally comes in. After several hours of a strong musk aroma, the sharp scent of frost hit you in the face, fresh and clean, leaving you in awe. For a moment, the whole family took a deep breath together, thanking the sharp pain in their lungs. But soon, the door closed. The room grew thick again, and the cycle of smell and survival began once more. So, in your mind, you burrow bed under the covers, breathing in the stench and letting it gradually fade into the background. Cold is a greater enemy. If scent is the price of warmth, it is a price worth paying. You drift into a dream, with the smell of smoke wafting in your nose and the rhythm of breathing together in your ears. Not only wrapped in blankets, but also bound by the pungent reality of medieval survival. Breathing in the smoke-filled air envelops you like another blanket. No matter how many people are crowded together, you will still tremble. No matter how much leather is pressed on the straw, there are always small gaps. The exposed face and toes were stinging from the cold. Therefore, medieval families turned to small protective devices, clothing and accessories specially made for the night. The most rudimentary and perhaps the most important items are the headscarf and socks. The inventory list and the descriptions in the paintings remind us that the medieval line tight was not a whimsical accessory, but a practical necessity. These hats are usually simple cones made of wool or linen, tied under the chin or loosely covering the ears and scalp. Why the head? Because heat dissipates very quickly there. In a world where the nose frosts over during sleep, a warm head may mean the difference between rest and trembling. Imagine putting on a woolen hat over your hair and pulling it to your eyebrows. It feels itchy, but also the warmth it seals in the fragile heat of your body. A small detail in the home furnishing manual. Sometimes people wrap scarves or strips of cloth around their chins, leaving only a small hole for breathing. These makeshift mufflers can prevent frost from forming on the lips and facial hair. Imagine a man lying stiffly on the bed, his beard covered with layer upon layer of cloth, his breath soaking the cloth, and by morning tiny crystals will form. It's not convenient, yes, but it's still better than waking up with chapped skin. Scholars still have differences of opinion on the prevalence of socks and stockings at night. Some people think that farmers sleep in the same stockings all day long and don't take them off until they rot. Some people also believe that every household has carefully made special sleeping homes, which are thick woolen materials specifically used for wearing at night. The old silk stockings discovered through archaeological excavations have been restored time and again, suggesting that these two approaches coexist. It is certain that warm feet are important, and cold leaves and frostbite are persistent risks in winter. Close your eyes and feel it. The rough wool scratches on your ankles and the contraction of the cloth tied around your knees. This is not comfortable wool. The seams will rub, but when you place your feet under your siblings or press them against a dog, the added layer will be completely different. Even nobles who slept on down beds would sleep in socks, which usually contained fur or embroidery for display. Warmth and vanity can share one piece of clothing. The sensory world has expanded. The hat is slightly itchy, making your scalp hot and your forehead damp. The stockings were tight at the knees, and the tie there would bite the skin. However, every time they're frozen to the quilt, you should thank the fabric. Without it, the chill would strike deeper and sharper. Move it lightly, pull the lid down and put your toes into the hose. Your body may hurt, but at least it won't freeze. There is a strange anecdote circulating in the letters of a noble lady. She complained that her husband's snoring was so loud that it blew the bed curtains apart. Not only did she wrap her head, but she also wrapped her ears to block out the noise. In her case, the Eintragt also uses earplugs, providing both noise reduction and warmth. You can imagine her face tightly wrapped in cloth, both happy and angry at her battle at night. The psychology of these garments is worth noting. Clothes have turned into armor against the night, reminding people that survival depends on preparation. Just as soldiers do not go to battle bare-handed, medieval families do not sleep without hats, hose, or scarves. It is rash to sleep without clothes on. Parents scolded their children for taking off their hats at night, warning them that they would lose warmth because of ghosts. This is more of practical wisdom than superstition. Just think about the noise of this preparation, the mess of fabric when tying a hat, the clicking sound of the stockings being pulled into place. The child resisted the gentle laughter of the itchy wool. Under the glow of the fire, the family seemed more like they were getting dressed for a trip than for sleep. And the quilt was pulled tight, the airflow was blocked, and the room became quiet, with only the sound of breathing and the faint wood sinking in the cold. Even in monasteries that advocate simplicity, monks sleep wearing headgear, and their habit is equivalent to that of pajamas. Rows of shaved heads vanished beneath the fabric. Everyone is wrapped up like a pupa, with consistent discipline and endurance. The sound of their breathing together was like the wind blowing through the reeds, quiet and rhythmic. They slept in a strictly controlled warmth. Another strange thing. Some farmers stuff stockings with straw or moss to increase insulation. Imagine you are lying in bed, your feet heavy and making a slight rustling sound every time you move. The smell of soil and grass rose faintly with each change. It's very primitive, but very effective. In survival, efficiency is always more important than elegance. Now imagine yourself dressed up neatly, with your head wrapped up, your feet wrapped up, and your body layered with coats and cloaks. You are heavy, stiff and clumsy, but you are warm. The hat is tightly against your ears, blocking the howling of the wind. The heat in the wool makes your feet feel a stinging pain. The outside world may be cold, but within your fabric cooking of life, and that's all you need to fall asleep slowly, restlessly, but safely. When you dream, a woolen hat slips past your ear, blocking the sound of the wind. But at this moment, another voice came from the other end of the room, the coughing of someone. You opened your eyes and realized that the air itself felt different, heavier and more pungent. The comfortable flame not only fills the room with warmth, but also with smoke. For many medieval families, the fires that protected them from frost also poisoned their lungs. Memorial records and medical literature mention how pit, coal or greenwood were burned when there was not enough firewood. The thick smoke produced by these fuels hung low in the room, seeping into hair, clothes and bedding. Imagine lying in a small house without a chimney, with only a hole in the roof, allowing the smoke to escape. The air inside is thick and pungent. Your eyes are moist and every breath is accompanied by a shrill sound. You cough gently, but everyone coughs, so no one complains. Survival is never clean. A special habit noticed by Nordic travelers is placing small shed pit blocks under the raised bed. They emit a steady heat, but also give off a pungent smell, filling the room with the sense of earth and sulfur. You imagine lying on such a brick, warmth seeping from the straw, while your nostrils are pricked by the smoke, comfort and discomfort hand in hand reaching you, just like that. Experts are still debating just how dangerous these smoky environments are. Some people believe that continuous exposure can lead to chronic respiratory problems, as evidenced by bone remains showing damage to the sinuses. Others believe that people have adapted to the air here and their bodies have become hard due to long inhalation of smoke. The debate is still ongoing, but the coughs, teary complaints in the records and the doctor's advice all indicate that the air is far from harmless. The sensory world is overwhelming. The smoke burns your throat, making it roar. It covered the roof beams, blackening them until every time the wind blew the house, the ashes rained down like raindrops. No matter how many times you dry it, a blanket always has a smell of ash, but the heat it brings means you can still stretch your toes, still feel the warmth on your skin, and still hope to wake up in the morning. For the nobles living in the stone castle, the problem was only partially improved. The huge fireplace sucks the smoke upwards, but the air current often sucks it downwards. The servants fan the wind with fans. Tapestries help absorb the haze, but the smell of charred wood still lingers in every home. Sometimes when guests leave, the smell of smoke on their clothes is very strong and can stay with them for several days. Imagine a banquet ending late at night, and the nobles returning to their rooms, all coughing gently and covering their heads with fur. In medieval medical literature, there emerged a strange treatment method burning herbs like juniper or rosemary to add sweetness to the air. The smoke is still smoke, but it has a different aroma and is believed to fight diseases. You imagine a mother throwing rosemary over the fire before going to bed, the room filled with the crackling sound of the fragrance, and children chattering about better scents. Whether this is really helpful or not, it must feel like a gift. The psychological harm caused by a smoke-filled night is worth imagining. Every household knew that this life-giving fire could also suffocate them. Parents are worried that the baby will be suffocated by the thick cool or become very weak due to coughing. Adults wake up with a headache and their eyes are red and painful. However, no one suggests sleeping without a fire. The risk of being frozen exceeds the risk of coughing. This is a gamble where there is no better option every night. Think of those voices. Sound was sharper and deeper than the wood. The wet wood in the fireplace, steaming with steam, made a faint hissing sound. The child's coughing was followed by the mother's hand gently patting his back. Outside, the wind grabs the blinds, but inside, the more urgent battle is against the weight of the invisible smoke. In the monastery, the rule of endurance meant that monks often did not light a fire at all in the dormitories. But in the infirmary or guest house, the fire was burning fiercely, followed by smoke. The pilgrims and the sick lay on the beds wrapped in blankets, their faces covered with soot, and they gradually fell into a restless sleep. Satire is sharp. The original intention of fire is to heal, but it can also cause harm. Another strange detail appeared in the travel record. Some families deliberately keep thick smoke in their small houses, believing that this can prevent the wooden beams from rotting and peel pests on the thatched roof. A smoking house is not regarded as a flaw but as being under repair. You imagine a family lying under the blackened rafters by soot, comforting themselves that the sting in their lungs is protecting the house above their heads. Now in your imagination, you are curled up under the blanket. Your eyes hurt, your throat itches, but your feet are warm. The flames hissed in the shadows they cast danced on the ceiling, and then lean against the straw. The smell of smoke is inevitable, but it is also the smell of survival. So you close your eyes and tell yourself, just like countless others, warmth, even a smoke minus like warmth, is better than no warmth at all. When you think of other things, peat smoke still lingers in your imagination, pungent and persistent. Not every person in the Middle Ages believed that only fire, fur, or corpses could keep warm. Some people believe that there is an invisible force controlling the night, so they turn to amulets and whispers to protect themselves from frost and ghosts. In a world where coldness can be fatal, the invisible is as threatening as cold air. Medieval sermons and folk records remind us that people often pinned amulets on their clothes or stuffed them into their bedding. A simple wooden cross can be placed under a pillow. Tying a bag of herbs, sage, root and or raise veretum around a child's pajamas can ward off the cold and evil spirits. Imagine you are lying down with such a bag pressing on your chest. A faint herbal scent mingled with the flavors of woolen smoke. Your mind becomes calm because you believe you are on guard on both fronts. A peculiar custom has emerged in rural folk tales. Sometimes children are given some iron pieces, such as nails or small knives, and asked to put them under their pillows. It is believed that iron can repel evil spirits that wander at night. Imagine a mother stuffing this thing under her son's straw pillow and whispering to him, "Put this beside you. Nothing cold or evil can touch you." Giving children weapons may seem cruel, but in that world, it is a kind of comfort. Experts are still debating to what extent these customs are religious and to what extent they are cultural habits. Some historians believe that the belief in charm is rooted in the pagan traditions behind Christianity. Others, however, believe that even devout Christians have accepted amulets without contradiction, regarding them as physical prayers rather than superstitions. The boundary between faith and folk tales is very blurred because of the need and the fear of winter nights. These charming sensory worlds are vivid. Imagine a bed that not only gives off the smell of straw and smoke, but also the smell of hay, spicy and bitter. When you turned over, a string of beads pressed against your chest. There is a faint metallic smell of iron under your pillow. None of these are the comfort in the modern sense. They itch, they poke for a smell, but they soothe the imagination. Imagination is half the battle against fear. In noble families, the form of amulets is more magnificent. There might be a jeweled box hanging on the bed, containing fragments of the sage's bones. The pilgrimage emblem was sewn onto the bedspread. You can almost see a small silver cross pinned to a child's blanket, reflecting the flickering of candles, which is regarded as a symbol of protective power. Mother pulled the quilt and let out a sigh of relief. Let warmth and sanctity protect this child. There is a strange anecdote in the chronicle of a French diocese. A family vowed to hang a horseshoe on their bed every winter, claiming that it could prevent frost and witches. The villagers laughed, but no one laughed too loudly. After all, this family seems to be more tolerant of winter than most people. Superstition and survival often go hand in hand. The psychological comfort these items offer to people cannot be overstated. In a well-minus ventilated hall, beneath the smoky rafters, the fear of the invisible ghost is as real as the fear of the cold. A child holding an amulet will feel safer, and this sense of security will make him fall asleep. Parents will feel more at ease knowing what they have done, even if it is to protect themselves from the dangers of the night. Whether the talismans really change the temperature or not, they warm the soul. Listen to the voice of this world. A mother was praying softly while tucking her child in. Her voice was deep and rhythmic. A bag of herbs was moving under the blanket, making a soft rustling sound. Someone rolled over, and the metal spell made a faint jingling sound. Lint does not refresh you, it does not energize you. The villagers often imagine it as a ghost wandering in the darkness. Inside, charm responds with silence, and their presence is enough to calm a frightened heart. The monastery, of course, does not encourage this practice and insists that it is sufficient to just pray. However, even monks would write prayers to keep warm, asking the saints to prevent frost from entering their dormitories. One of the manuscripts is specifically dedicated to praying for bedding, calling for the sacred warmth to protect sleepers. Even in a group, comfort is needed at night. This symbolic meaning is powerful. Sleeping under a spell means acknowledging one's vulnerability, admitting that fire are not enough, and that you need intangible help. But it also recognizes communities, traditions, and common beliefs. Each amulet carries the weight of several generations, reminding people that survival is not only physical but also spiritual. Now imagine yourself back on a straw bed with a coarse wool blanket over your shoulders. A bag of herbs is pressed against your chest. A wooden cross lies under your pillow. Frost spreads silently, unstoppable and mercilessly. However, your breathing becomes easier because you believe you are protected. The cold still seeps into your toes. The smoke still stings your eyes, but fear relaxes its control. You float into a dream where the warmth is not only physical, but also blissful, where you think it is safe. The amulet under the pillow gently presses against your cheek, but soon you will remember that the most precious warmth does not come from charm or smoke, but from the warm and soothing water, which is a rare treasure in winter. In the Middle Ages, taking a bath before going to bed was a luxury, and when it happened, it felt almost like a miracle. Imagine walking into a bathtub filled with steam after trembling for several days. Your body slackened, your skin stung. At that glorious moment, the frost lost all its strength. Medical works and chronicles show that it is recommended to take warm baths to maintain health, especially to relieve joint pain and put the body in a resting state.